Welcome to AppSec Unlocked. I'm your host, Edwin Kwan, and in our previous episode, we dove into measuring security awareness. Today, we're tackling something more fundamental: how to build security into your organization's DNA. We're talking about creating a security culture by design. Because here's the truth: you can have the best tools, the strongest policies, and the most thorough training. But if your culture doesn't support security, none of that matters. Let me start with a story. Last month, a senior developer at a major tech company found a critical vulnerability in their authentication system. Instead of fixing it quietly, or worse, ignoring it, they immediately reported it. Why? Because they knew they would be celebrated for finding it, not blamed for the vulnerability. And that's what a positive security culture looks like. It's not about rules or fear. It's about creating an environment where security becomes the natural way of thinking and working. Let's break down what security culture isn't. First, it's not about perfect security, and it's very hard to get that anyways. Next, it's not about zero incidents, because if you start measuring that, people will stop reporting. Third, it's not about restrictive policies. And lastly, it is definitely not about blame. The foundations of security culture is psychological safety. Now let's talk about what this means in practice. When it comes to incident response and creating an incident response culture, it is where you celebrate reporting and not perfectionism, like the example I gave earlier. And the focus when it comes to incident response is on the learning, not the blame. It's not the who forgot to do this or who forgot to do that. It's about what can we do going forward to prevent this from happening again. And it's about sharing lessons openly. And that comes to the blame thing. You can only share lessons openly when you're approaching this from a culture where it's not about blaming, it's about learning. And the last thing is to reward transparency. And what about psychological safety when it comes to daily operation? It would be about making security discussions normal. You'll be encouraging questions and challenges. I always like to start with the why. Why are we doing this? And let people challenge if they feel that this is not the best approach. It's also about supporting experimentation with security tools. I'm more focused on the outcome, not the specific tools. So I'm happy to experiment with whatever tools people are comfortable with or they recommend. And lastly, it's about recognizing security initiatives. Remember, people don't avoid security because they don't care. They avoid it because they're afraid of doing it wrong. So let's look at the key elements of building security culture. The very first one is to get leadership buy-in. And not just leadership buy-in, but you need visible executive support. You need the people from the executive team to be talking about why security is important. The security needs to be reflected in the company values. You also need to have a resource commitment, because teams can want to do security, but if they are so focused or they're being measured on delivery, that is the thing that they're going to focus on. And leadership also needs to lead by example. I remember a story about a company having a policy for having MFA, but the CEO wanted an exemption from it. That is not leading by example. The second key element for building security culture is communication. regular security updates, letting people know what's happening, why we're doing this. Celebrate clear security victories. It's also about being transparent in incident reviews, which I talked about earlier, and also having open feedback channels. And the last element is integration, where security needs to be embedded in daily workflows. You need tools that enables, not block. We keep talking about security tooling as being guardrails. There needs to be clear security guidelines, and there also needs to be accessible security resources. Now let's talk about a practical implementation. If you're trying to build culture within your organization, the first thing you gotta do is start with quick wins. You could do things like having security brown bag sessions where you talk about some of the work that's happening or an education about a certain kind of implementation. There could also be team security challenges that you could kind of roll out in there. You should also have recognition programs. And one thing that I've seen some companies do with quite a lot of success is having security office hours, where you could have someone from security being stationed, available, either physically or online through your organization's chat, and people can reach out and ask questions during that time. Once you got those quick wins in, it's now time to start building some momentum. Some of the things that I've seen that have worked are building a security champions network. Another thing that I've seen happening is having cross-team security projects where you want to build some sort of inter-system auth or a common authentication authorization system. Next, security hackathons, such as HackBlitz that I ran not too long ago. These are interesting programs to help build momentum. And lastly, you can share success stories. Once you've got those momentum in there, you need to sustain the change. And that's also very important. So doing things like regular culture assessments where you look to see what's working, what's not, having feedback loops where you're focused on continuous improvement, and making sure you evolve the programs so that it adapts to the change in the organization. The key is making security visible, accessible, and most importantly, normal. Now, let's address some common challenges or resistance with regards to security culture. The most common one is the mindset of security is slowing us down. And this is where the challenge is on us to show how security enables the business. You can do that by demonstrating the costs of incidents, the time taken away from your developers or the people or the system owners with regards to addressing those incidents. You can share success stories, and you can also highlight the competitive advantages of being secure by default in terms of time saved with vulnerability patching and so forth. The other challenge is the "that's not my job" attitude. And this is where you need to address that by creating a shared responsibility model. Show the impact of security. And what really works for me is if you have security built into performance reviews and you also recognize security contributors. I've seen an organization where they would run a yearly security awareness training program, and they had multiple levels for their champions program. And what they would do is at the end of that, they had the chief technology officer award the people who have leveled up in their champions program and moved on to the next level. So that's how you recognize security contributions. The last common challenge is it's too complex barrier, And the way you address that is you need to break down security into digestible pieces. Look at it from their perspective. How can we make it easier for them? You can do that by providing clear guidelines or even offering immediate support. And that's where that Security Champions program would really help with that. So remember, these are the key principles that are needed to have a security culture by design. First is that culture change starts with psychological safety. Second, you need to make security visible and accessible. Third, you need to celebrate security wins and learn from incidents. Fourth, you need to build security into everyday workflows. And lastly, you need to be able to measure and adjust continuously. In our next episode, we'll explore how to design and run effective secure coding bootcamps. But for now, I'd love to hear about your experiences building security culture. What worked and what hasn't? This is Edwin Kwan from AppSec Unlock. Thanks for listening.